Right, we're continuing our journey through the Gospels today, and we are landing today on the third Gospel, the Gospel of Luke. There's lots of things I like about Luke's Gospel. I don't know if you've got a favourite Gospel. Luke is not my favourite, that's for next time, but there's lots of good things to say about Luke. I've started off often and shown you the opening words of the previous two Gospels, Matthew and Mark. And let's have a look at the opening words of Luke. There's quite a lot of them to share with you. Inasmuch as many have taken in hand to set in order a narrative of those things which have been fulfilled among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered them to us, it seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write to you an orderly account, most excellent Theophilus, that you may know the certainty of those things in which you were instructed. It's quite a verbose opening, but we learn a couple of things from it. One is that Luke is very aware that he's not the only person writing this story down. There are many others who have written the same story he's about to tell, but he's talking to possibly a person or a group of people. And we have this name down near the bottom, Theophilus. And it could either be a name or it could be a title. Does anybody know, or can anybody guess what Theophilus means?
Theology is essentially
theology, so we have that beginning of that word theology, which is all about God.
And philosophy.
Theology is all about God. And then you have Philos. We have that in the name Philip. Philip. It's a lover. So a lover of God, Theophilus, you see. So it might be the name of a person, or it might be addressed to a particular group of people. So those are the things that I particularly learned from this. But I also just want to point out to you that this name Theophilus crops up somewhere else in the Bible. And it's here, at the beginning of the book of Acts, where it begins, "The former account I made, O Theophilus, of all that Jesus began both to do and teach," and so on. So here we have one person who has written two books, the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. So he begins with the story of Jesus and he moves on then to the story of the establishment of the early church. That's his whole aim. This person, Luke, we think was probably a disciple of the Apostle Paul. So we talked about Mark last week being associated with the Apostle Peter. This is the Apostle Paul. Now, the interesting thing about Paul is Paul spent a great deal of time talking to the Gentiles. He wasn't content with teaching about Jesus to the Jews and the people in the land of Palestine. He wanted to go overseas, elsewhere. And so he went to Greece, he went to Rome and many other places teaching the Gentiles about Jesus. And so Luke's gospel is a gospel to the Gentiles. We think a number of things about Luke. First of all, we think he was a doctor. He was very interested in Jesus' healings. We also note in his gospel a real concern for women. There are many, many stories about, concerning, and from the point of view of women in Luke's gospel. And the other thing that he is very concerned about is the outcast. Now, if we think about the unique passages that only appear in Luke, we see something of these concerns. So this is not an exhaustive list, by the way. There are many others, but I picked out a few. So the first thing is, Luke presents a story of the birth of Jesus which is quite unique. It's different from the one that's presented in Matthew. And the thing about it is it's presented from Mary's point of view. Whereas the birth story that is presented in Matthew's Gospel is from Joseph's. Joseph is the one who's active in Matthew. It's Mary who's active and busy in Luke's Gospel. We also have the story of Jesus as a young boy being taken to the temple. They also set the stories of Jesus, they set the birth of Jesus in particular, in a bigger context. In Matthew's Gospel, if you remember, it talks about the wise men who go and visit Herod. Luke's comment is that Jesus' birth happens when Quirinius is governor of Syria. He's talking on a much bigger world stage than Matthew is. And we have stories also of things like the woman who bathed Jesus' feet with her tears. That's only in Luke's Gospel. The story of Martha and Mary. That's only in Luke's Gospel. And the healing of the crippled woman on the Sabbath. That's unique also to Luke's Gospel. And then when we turn to the parables, we have some very important and very famous parables that are only in Luke's Gospel. And they show these concerns. The Good Samaritan is only in Luke's Gospel. There is the outcast, the value of the outcast. We have the rich man who decided to build bigger barns. It's a very short little parable, but it's a very important one. The prodigal son, also. The rich man and Lazarus. And the Pharisee and the tax collector, the two men who go to pray in the temple. So you can see particularly here the concern he has for the outcast. And this theme of the rich man often, and the theme in the Good Samaritan, the idea that the Pharisee and the Levite pass by the man who is injured. It's the Samaritan, it's the outcast, the person we look down on who provides this man with some help and assistance. Luke is showing the way that the religion of the time in the land of Israel was so consumed with its own importance, not worried or concerned about anybody else other than judging other people. So that's a very quick snapshot of the Gospel of Luke. Many, many good stories in there worth reading and being aware of.